Hello everyone, so I know this is kind of weird for me to start off a video like this, considering that for the past handful of episodes I haven't been using my camera or even my microphone. I've been mostly using my audio equipment on my own computer, and all that. But I wanted to say, before we get into the lists, because I'm putting this video on both the best and worst lists of 2017, part 2, I wanted to say thank you so much for subscribing to the new subscribers that I've gotten. I know it's not a lot, considering that there was 9 new people that decided to sign up for my channel, and to see even if it was just like maybe 1 or 2 subscribers, or I know, again, I'm not making this sound like some big thing, because it really isn't. I mean, it's a small amount of subscribers, but it matters to me because of what's been going on with YouTube. I really want to have this channel be a bit bigger, and I'm not pressuring any new viewers of mine to go out and convince other people to subscribe, because that's not what I want to do. My whole purpose of my channel at this point is that I want to make it more into a space where we can talk about films, discuss films, and I've been working on a couple projects here and there, considering some films that I want to analyze and whatnot, and I'm starting up some new shows that I want to put onto the channel. I'm trying to dial back a bit on some of the reviews, like regular reviews that some reviewers do, like, weekly reviews like Chris Suckman. I want to do more of a mixture of those weekly reviews and some other stuff, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, so yeah, thank you again. Rough summation. Thank you guys so much for subscribing to my channel. It has meant a bit to me because my channel hasn't grown a lot, and I'm glad that people can, subscribe to my channel even if they don't watch it. Even if they don't watch this video, I want them to know, personally, thank you for subscribing to my channel. It makes a whole big difference to me as a small YouTuber, and granted, I don't make money. I really don't. Due to the fact that A, I don't have a Patreon, and 2, advertising revenue's a complete joke, and every time I put up a new video, I get monetized. So, yeah. Again, rough summation, thank you for subscribing, and on to finish off the lists. Peace. Number 25, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. This comes from the Lobster director, who's Greek. I have to admit, watching a Greek film is very different than watching any other foreign film, because I could watch a Korean film or a Mexican film or a German film and get some of the themes right away. But when it comes to Greek films, that's an entirely different thing to me. And The Killing of a Sacred Deer does have its faults with me, particularly in some of the acting decisions. Most of it's just monotone. And, for a person like me who's grown up with films that had dynamic acting and very interesting acting, The Killing of a Sacred Deer just kind of is a downgrade for me. But what kept it interesting for me is that this entire film was essentially the statement to kill your darlings. As if it's a standard screenwriting technique that sometimes the best way to make a story better is by killing one of your own. And sometimes you have to take a risk and say, hey, let's do a roulette. Next up is Logan Lucky. Now, Logan Lucky was done by the team behind the original Ocean's 11, 12, and 13, and it tells of two guys in Kentucky who plan to rob a raceway. And what makes this very different is that this side of society isn't very focused on, or at least even given into a positive light, because most of the time our common media perception of who these people are is just, oh, well, we're the country rednecks, and we're gonna hitch our lawnmowers to the back of our trucks and make them into plows. And
I don't know. Like, that's just the weirdest kind of thing. And you would, like, you would expect, like, these types of people to be like, oh, well, we're also racist, too. But no. It shows these people trying to do the best they can in the situation that they're in, and sometimes they have to break the law to do it. And it has some pretty good performances, the script is pretty tight, but it's not that great of a movie in terms of the pacing, and there's a couple actors in here that just don't work, like Seth MacFarlane, not a great actor in this film, and the person who's playing the wife of Channing Tatum definitely didn't do a good job acting either. But aside from that, I liked it for the most part. It's not a great film, but it's enjoyably good. Okay, so you remember how I said that 2017 was a year full of weird films? Well, the next one on our list is definitely a weird film. At number 23 is Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. I told you so. I told you this was going to happen on this list. Captain Underpants, to me, it's not a great film by any means, but it's so damn weird. I mean, the amount of effort that's put into this movie is just astronomical. The references to the original books that I used to read as a kid were well done, and it seems like they kind of combined the first and fourth book together to make a kind of a Frankenstein-ish film. The voice acting is really well done, and they do break the fourth wall tons of friggin' times. This is like the kid version of Deadpool, if you will, but it's done with Harold and his friend. And it's essentially a film full of potty humor and being imaginative, and it's well done. I mean, I don't think this film is a great film, and I don't think it's the greatest superhero film of all time or the greatest movie of all time. And it kind of sounds like I'm saying that, but for the majority of it, I was constantly entertained just how much bizarreness just went into this film. There's even one point in the film where they just use sock puppets. I'm not making this up. And it's just so weird. And there's even one part of the movie, too, where they're like, oh, well, the animation budget wasn't in for this scene, so we'll just do the Flip-O-Rama. I found that creative and very fun. Will this film get a sequel? I hope so, because I think we need a little bit more of Captain Underpants. And I know it's the most immature sounding movie I could ever put on this list. But trust me, if this list also has Power Rangers on it, you might as well go see Captain Underpants. It's not a great film, alright? It's not a gold standard film, but I would recommend it just for the sake of watching it once. It's not, again, not a great film, but I would recommend seeing it at least once. At number 22 is Thor Ragnarok. This 17th entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe is done by Taika Waititi, who did What We Do in the Shadows. And what's very different about this film and what a lot of people gravitated towards this film was with the fact that it seemed like a very different film, both genre-wise and tonally, than the other two Thor films. Because let's be honest, the Thor films haven't really been the strongest of the MCU. In fact, a lot of people put them on the bottom tier list of ranking the films. And for Thor Ragnarok to be highly rated, highly anticipated, and to have a big box office draw is actually really good, in my opinion, considering that the history of the Thor movies weren't exactly so great. But I think one of the biggest problems with it that kept it from putting it onto the great category for me is the fact that this film felt like two different films and the pace was just off a lot. And the villain just wasn't that interesting to me either. And that's been a common, consistent problem with the MCU, and that, it hasn't really bothered me too much, but this film, it kinda did. Even if the villain of the story actually is having a good time with what she's given, which is played by Cate Blanchett. But I have to admit that a lot of the jokes were funny, but some of them just go on for too long. Like in the first sequence when you see Suther and Thor's just spinning around on this cable, and he's just like, oh, whoa, okay, oh, let me turn around so I can see you again. Okay, so what are you saying? That kind of stuff, I didn't quite like so much. But, for the most part, I was consistently entertained, and I do think this is the best Thor film out of the bunch. but I don't think it's the best MCU film out of the bunch. It's fun, it's engaging, it has its quirky moments, and that's Taika Waititi in a nutshell. So, yeah, if you're a Taika Waititi fan, you're gonna love this film, no matter what I say. But, I don't think it's that great of a film. At number 21 is The Post. So remember when I was talking about Wonder Woman and how, a female empowerment film is? Well, I think The Post is a better example of this. Mostly because this is derived from real-life events with the Washington Post and what happened with the Pentagon Papers back in the 70s and 80s, and which led into the Watergate scandal. But you have this actress, you have Meryl Streep playing this woman who wasn't chosen to run the Washington Post, but was given to her anyway because her husband died and she got control of the company. And so she has to make this huge decision, and she didn't have any role models, as the ATZ show says in his own video. And what makes this so good for an empowerment film is that sometimes you don't necessarily need to have a hero in order to become one. And I think that's the most pertinent message about The Post that you could say, is that you don't necessarily need to have a hero to inform you of what you need to do. Sometimes the best way to become a hero or to become successful is to just forge your own path with what you have. And what the person who ran the Washington Post did is very commendable for what she did. And you see her throughout the entire movie, being confronted, being challenged in every way. And that's a good hero to me, is that when you have heroes that are challenged and they overcome them in very successful ways, and especially what happened in real life, that is what I appreciate the most. But what keeps it from getting onto the great list is several key factors. One is that it feels very cheap. It feels like a made-for-TV movie at times, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it kind of is a degrading quality. And pacing-wise, the first act is very slow. Oh my god, I've never felt so bored for the first act, ever. Like, they start off with the Pentagon Papers being copied, but we have to wait 45 minutes until they're reintroduced into the movie to our main characters. And that's when the movie gets picked up again. And that's where, the discrepancies lie. Is that you get part of the first act, which is good, but then the rest of it is just so slow that you're eagerly waiting for those Pentagon Papers to get to the Washington Post. And when it does, it becomes more interesting, and you get more character drama, more character conflict. It has some good acting, but the pacing and editing and storytelling of this is a bit slow. And that's just what I think. But The Post is a really well done movie, even if it has some flaws that I don't quite like. At number 20 is Molly's Game, which is the first film that is written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. This is a film that's very interesting because it tells the tale of this real life person who ran underground gambling rings, and is kind of a loose-ish adaptation from the book that's based off of the real-life character of Molly and her relationship to her dad. And, it's pretty well written, but I think the problem with it is that at times the pace can be very slow, as I said before. Some of the acting isn't as good as it wants to be, as it needs to be. And the whole thing at the end with Kevin Costner and Jessica Chastain at the end just felt very rushed to me. It's like, oh, well, we're gonna have 20 years of therapy in 3 minutes, and isn't it the most convenient and rushed way to end things? Couldn't you just have maybe a couple more scenes between the two? And I don't know, it just didn't quite pan out as well. But for Aaron Sorkin, it's pretty well done. It's not as good as I thought it was the first time I watched it. At number 19 is John Wick 2. Keep in mind, John Wick 2 is not a great sequel to the original John Wick. But it's just so over the top, it's fun, it has a dumb plot, it has a dumb story, but it's just so well executed that I didn't mind watching it again and again. And I watched it with a friend of mine, and he's like, yeah, that's really fucking cool. And it was. Like, Keanu Reeves, yeah, at times can have some bad acting, but again, it's just so damn entertaining. It's a great film that has good action scenes. It has over-the-top acting at times, but it's well produced. And that's what I like the most out of John Wick 2. It may not have been a great sequel to one of the biggest breakout hits a couple years ago, but it's really well done, and I'm kind of excited to see what John Wick 3 has to bring in its finale of this trilogy. At number 18 is I, Tonya. Now, I live in Oregon, and I live near Portland, Oregon, where Tonya Harding was raised, but at no point in my study of Oregon history did I ever learn about Tonya Harding. And it wasn't until this movie was announced that I actually looked up the history of Tonya, and boy, was she a very divisive person. Like, her storyline in this whole movie made me kind of interested in what she had to say. So, yeah, I, Tonya is about Tonya Harding, who is one of the most infamous skaters in United States history, in fact, world history. And at 23 years old, she was framed, or at least had something to do with the injury of Nancy Cartwright, who was a international skating champion. And to go into her backstory about how her mother abused her as a kid, who forced her to do these things, who had an abusive relationship with her husband and whatnot, is very interesting to me. It kind of plays the story like as if it's a Goodfellas story, but it's not quite as good in quality as it needs to be. The acting all around is really good, but I think the thing that kind of made me kind of iffy with the film at first is Margot Robbie. Again, I don't mean to hate on Margot Robbie. She's a terrific actress. She was great in The Wolf of Wall Street. I couldn't buy her being 23. That's the thing. I couldn't buy her being 23, even if she is 27 to 29 years old, and I can't really confirm that right now. But, like, I couldn't really buy it. I didn't buy when she was at the end. I couldn't buy what she became at the end, which was, when she gets her license revoked and she's banned from doing any sort of skating competitions ever again. I didn't buy her emotion in that. But there are times in the movies where I kind of did. When she's having this confrontation with her mom, I like those scenes. But the ending just didn't quite hit me so hard because I didn't believe that she was hurt by it. I didn't believe in her. That's my main problem. But for the most part, the script is very tight. The editing is pretty good. The acting is really good, especially from the bodyguard character. Really well done. Visually wise, it's pretty standard, and I kind of like the film, even if the real life character is a bit despicable in nature. So yeah, I recommend I, Tonya, even if it's not a truly great film. At number 17 is SpiderMan Homecoming. Well, Spider-Man has been part of my life for, all of my life, and I've been one of the biggest Spider-Man fans ever. In fact, I did a whole Spider-Man week full of Spider-Man related episodes where I reviewed every single movie ever created for Spider-Man. And Spider-Man Homecoming was one of those films that I was highly anticipating because it is a return to form for Spider-Man, what I knew about him. But this new take is one of my favorite takes on Spider-Man. Mostly because this is a John Hughes-esque type film. And let's not forget that this is written by John Francis Daley, who was part of Fringe and a bunch of other different comedies and whatnot, and his writing gear is really well sold. I buy this new Peter Parker as being this high school kid who's a bit anxious about having to ask out this one girl that he likes. There is a couple things I didn't like there isn't a lot of heart that's put into this film, but there is some heart, but not fully. There is some editing techniques in here, just in one scene in particular where it does a swipe, and the editing in that just didn't quite work for me, even if it was visually interesting, and the joke that led into it was kind of funny. But the whole thing with the Vulture could have easily have been one of the worst things in the world, but I actually enjoyed what they did with the Vulture. And Michael Keaton, he plays it really well. And how it kind of opens up at the end for new villains to come out is very well sold. I just think there's a couple things wrong with it, particularly in the pacing and the scope. It just feels a bit too small to me. It could have expanded a bit, but I like it the way it is nowadays, and after rewatching it, I found myself really enjoying it more. So yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming, not a great film, but it's pretty damn close to being it. At number 16 is Call Me By Your Name. You know what's interesting is that the history of the LGBT community in films haven't necessarily been the best for them. And when it came time for Call Me By Your Name, I was kind of begrudging it. I wasn't exactly excited for it, but at the same time, I had some hopes because I saw it had good reviews. People tend to gravitate towards it pretty well, so let's talk about it. The one thing to really bring forth in this review, this sort of short review for it, is that it doesn't do all the typical, things you would find from an LGBT character or an LGBT movie, in that you get a character that says, oh, you can't do that gay thing because that gay thing is a violation of my religious rights, blah, 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 blah. We see that enough already. So the most genius aspect about this film is that it just plays it as if it's normal. And that's what I've been saying for the longest time. If you want to have good representation, just play them as normal characters. You don't need to have this big overarching political message. Just display a story. That's what I am looking for with films. James Ivory's work on this film with his writing is solid. It is solid work, but there is some points in it. It's solid, but it has some points where I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't so good. The pacing wise, it's a bit off kilter. Somebody editing of this film is a bit off kilter as well, where it just kind of cuts in the middle of certain conversations, and if it just kind of expanded a bit and gone a little bit further in certain sequences to really get some of the more dramatic aspects about this film across, it would have been a truly magnificent film. But Call Me By Your Name is really well done, for the most part. Armie Hammer and the kid who plays Elio, really good, solid acting on their parts. Visually, it's not a great looking film, but it has some good cinematography at times. And in terms of what this film does, it's well done. I think it's a very well done film. And the final film in the good category is It, 2017. Now, the funny thing with It is that initially I had a negative reaction to when it was first announced. I was like, oh, how are they going to remake this? Ooh, the book is way too fucking big. The original has too much nostalgic power. How is it going to hold up? Well then, after it was released and everyone's seen it and I saw it, it became one of the highest grossing R-rated films of all time. In terms of horror films, it has a gross of nearly $700 million internationally, gross-wise. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it has multiple things. One is that the namesake of It belongs to Stephen King, and Stephen King being internationally beloved as a horror writer is very apparent. But what also makes it interesting is that it's very totally different than the original. Now, I saw the original miniseries before I went to go see this, and the new It is just so better done as a horror film than the original miniseries. But I think what makes it kind of odd to me is that the Pennywises in both probably could have been switched. As opposed to Pennywise in the new film being played by Bill Skarsgård, how he's just overly, dramatic with his horror-esque performances. He should have been a bit more subtle, and that's my number one thing. He should have had a little bit more subtlety. Like with Tim Curry in the original, you got a sense of something very eerie with this character, but he's very friendly on approach. And you get some of that in the opening scene with Eddie or not Eddie, but Georgie in the new It, but it's not as subtle as you think. Some of the visual effects don't quite hold up so well after repeated viewings, but for the most part, the story, the characters, and the writing, and some of the visual stuff that they do with this film, especially the Neibolt Street house sequences, really well done. I enjoyed that. But I think the thing is that when I saw the deleted scenes, that's where I put it into the good category instead of great. Is that if these deleted scenes get put back in for the director's cut, it probably would make for a great film of 2017. So I'm silently waiting for a director's cut to come out for this film because I really want to have that Stan that Stan monologue that he does in the synagogue in one scene that they kind of glanced over in this montage sequence, and they just kind of skip it over in the theatrical cut. I want that scene in there because it adds so much more. The Henry Bowers stuff towards the end when he goes to the Neibolt Street house leading up to his fall down a well, that stuff adds to it. There's so many deleted scenes that adds more to the film that I'm just kind of shocked that they didn't put in the first time around. So that's kind of why it didn't quite get to the great category, but it's well done. And so now off to the great category. What did I think? What are my 14 films that are great in my opinion? Now granted, some of these can be interchangeable with other films in the great category, but nothing, with the good or decent category. So, let's start off with number 14, The Florida Project. Now, I did have a problem in my original review for the film when I said that the last 30 seconds of the film just kind of confused me and came out of nowhere. Well, I kind of think I didn't read it too closely, and I don't want to give anything away for spoilers for this one, but let's just say it fits narratively well within the themes of the film and how geographically it mixes in with those themes. The Florida Project is essentially a human story about how people treat each other on the most despicable of places near one of the most happiest places on Earth, which is Disney World. And the Florida Project has some great performances, good cinematography, great cinematography at times, a good child actress, surprisingly good that she got a Golden Globe award for her. I think it was a Golden Globe or Critics' Choice Award for her acting ability over Daphne Keane. And, as much as that shocked me a bit, I enjoyed her performance nonetheless. And the story is well told, and at no point was I ever bored with the film. And that's the thing with the film, is that it just, again, just like with Call Me By Your Name, it just straightforward, tell a story, don't do any bullshit. And that's what the Florida Project does for me. And at number 13 is A Ghost Story. Now, A Ghost Story isn't an exactly fully digestible film. It takes multiple viewings in order to really appreciate the film. And I say that because the film is slow. And I'll tell you that straight up. And sometimes I hate films that are slow, that it outpaces the things that are interesting. But for the purposes of A Ghost Story, it tells a story about this guy who dies and is on a whole quest to find out what the meaning of life can be, what is the slip of paper that his former wife put into the walls of his house. But that slowly that's not really the focus of the entire thing. It's just the exploration of humanity. And yeah, sure, it is a bit of a hippie type film and a bit of oh man, when we die, things just go on forever. It's yeah, I mean, we kind of figured that, but for the most part, it tells its story so uniquely that I'll link a video by the ATZ show who did a really good job talking about how this film is a very human film. And I don't really have anything else to say about it, but except for maybe Casey Affleck is in a giant, piece of cloth for most of the movie. So there's that for you. If you don't like Casey Affleck, you don't have to look at his face most of the time, so there's that. So yeah, that's a ghost story. I enjoyed it, even if it is a bit, hippie-ish. Coming in at number 12 is Greta Gerwig's first introduction to directing, and that is Lady Bird, with Saoirse Ronan as the title character, Lady Bird. I think I said her name correctly. If I'm wrong, someone punch me in my face. But Lady Bird tells a coming-of-age tale that isn't very conventional. The style of humor is not... It's something that you have to kind of get used to. It's not the humor is not your standard typical comedy film about coming of age. It has some aspects of, like, coming of age films that have that. But what sets this film apart from other ones is that while other films have this sort of mentality to be like, oh, well, we could be fully better than ourselves, and we don't have to worry about, our parents anymore. We don't have to worry about, things like that anymore. We're becoming of age. We're doing this. No, what this movie does at the end of the film is it kind of reminds you that at one time you may think that going away to college or going out into life on your own is going to be the best thing in the world. You don't have to worry about anything. There are times when you want to look back at things that, that affected you as a kid. Whether it be riding around in your hometown on a bike on a sunny day, or going for your first driving test, things like that you do in your hometown will always stay with you. The hometown that you're from is not going to leave you no matter how much you try to advance beyond it. The film has good performances, especially from the mother character and also the nun character, which I found it particularly enjoyable. The story as a whole is pretty good, but I think the one problem I have with it is Lucas Hedges. He's not that great of an actor in this movie. Like, he is probably the most annoying aspect about this, because it kind of just presents this sort of stereotype. I don't know if it's necessarily a stereotype or not, but it's kind of a common thing to say. It's like, oh, well, if a man doesn't want to be with you for a certain amount of time, that means he's gay secretly, and it kind of enforces that. And I don't know. I've seen that done in so many other movies, and it's just kind of annoying. And so that's only one thing I didn't like about the film. And there's nothing really else that I don't like about the film. There's a lot of things I really do love. The writing, the direction, the characters, pretty well done for the most part. Except for Lucas Hedges. That's one thing I can't. I love this film. I really do. Even if it's not as good as the original Lego Movie, you have to give it some credit as being one of the best DC films, at least Batman films, since The Dark Knight. Mostly because it makes fun of itself. It's a film that kind of talks about Batman and is a huge love letter to Batman fans. It has tons of fucking references everywhere. Like, I couldn't even name every single Easter egg because there's just so many. And while it does have some problems with some of the pace and some of the jokes just not hitting as hard as some others, it's a story about Batman and a take on Batman that I don't really think is kind of talked about much, even with the Damian Wayne stuff currently. But the Lego Batman movie serves to be a great love letter to fans of The Dark Knight and fans of, well, Legos. Again, not as good as the original Lego Movie, but it comes pretty close. At number 9 is Dunkirk. Dunkirk is a purely visual film, in my opinion. Christopher Nolan has always had a thing about telling films narratively visually speaking. And this film benefits a lot from the sound design that helps with the pacing of the film, that helps with telling of the film. It's not a film that is basically like, oh, well, here's a character that has a wife back home. It doesn't follow the traditional, like, military movie sort of cliches. And, anything, conditions or anything of military movies. It just tells a story about, the every man for himself situation that happened in Dunkirk in 1940. And it tells it visually very well. Some of the acting just isn't that great, especially from Harry Styles, but the rest of it is really good. It plays with your perception of time, and it builds up the tension mostly through the sound design, which does not work on home video. You need to have a 5.1 surround sound in order to get that full immersion into the movie, because on home video and home media, it doesn't quite work so well unless you have surround sound and you have a big TV. Because again, a lot of how the adrenaline and a lot of the anxiety is built is through the sound design, and it's through the sound editing. And I feel like the film at home doesn't necessarily correlate to what I felt in the movie theater. So if you don't have 5.1 surround sound, it's probably not going to work for you. But it is a good film. Don't get me wrong. It's a good film filled with great practicals, great cinematography, great performances, and really good effects. And I really enjoyed this movie for the most part. You just got to have the right sound equipment to really get the sound design and the sound editing. At number 8 is The Disaster Artist. So, The Room was a thing back in 2003, and The Room and I've reviewed The Room before, and it is one of the most talked about bad, so good movies. It's so bad, it's so good. And The Disaster Artist is a kind of a loose adaptation of the Greg Sestero book of the same name, where he talks about his relationship with Tommy Wiseau. And the film and also the book never really explain how Tommy Wiseau got the money for the film, or even certain things. There is a couple things that this movie does wrong, in my opinion. When we see those side-by-side comparison shots at the end of the movie for scenes that they recreated, there's certain framings that were off on the recreation. There's certain things that were wrong, like the keyings and again, some of the framings, there was even one shot where it's supposed to have a boom mic and it doesn't in the recreations. But for the most part, if James Franco was not Tommy Wiseau in this film would have almost no legs, because most of the film is kind of carried with James Franco's performance as Wiseau, and that can either make or break some people. But I found this film very heartwarming, and it kind of has this message at the end that I really do appreciate. Because a lot of the times when it comes to people who want to be in Hollywood, they always want to be the big guns. They always want to be the captains of the industry. They want to, and it's good to have that mentality. But sometimes the best successes in life are being the most memorable, right? Because initially, Tommy Wiseau wanted to be taken seriously as a filmmaker, and it wasn't until years later that he said that it was supposed to be a comedy, even if that explanation was kind of bullshit. That's just my opinion. But, it's a film that tells a message that sometimes successes can be found accidentally, even if your initial sort of projection for what you wanted doesn't go the way you want it to. And the message of it, I really enjoyed. It's just, without James Franco and the energy that he provides, it would not have worked as well, because Dave Franco doesn't really do that great of a performance, and the girl that he meets up with in the film doesn't give that great of a performance either. But, again, James Franco, the script, most of the other elements work. It's just that without James, it would not have worked. So, yeah, The Disaster Artist is a fun, entertaining, heartwarming film about the passion of filmmaking. And it reminded me, to an extent, of the film Ed Wood. And it's so good. It's good. I think The Disaster Artist is good. Coming in at number 7 is Baby Driver. Baby Driver, for the most part, has some great action scenes. Everything in the pace of the actors to the music that's presented, Like, the behind-the-scenes stuff for Baby Driver, how they actually played the music on set so that they can choreograph everything so that even in the editing room they can put it together and have a better time editing the film. And it's just so well done. The pacing of the action scenes to the music that you use is good. The soundtrack selections are like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 levels of great. I really enjoyed the sound selections for the film. The action is well done. Characters are written fully. I like Jamie Foxx's character in the film, surprisingly, even if I don't like him as an actor. Like, he does a good job in this film. And you also get to see Kevin Spacey get shot. Yeah, he gets shot in the film, so yeah, if you hate his guts, you'll probably want to rewatch that scene multiple times. Not saying that, not saying anything bad about Kevin Spacey, even if, he's been accused of multiple things. Continuing on, Baby Driver is a well-made film, but I think there's one thing that kind of makes it not so, doesn't get higher on my list, is the fact that the third act is a bit slower and not as good as the first two acts. But aside from that, I enjoy the film from start to finish, even with a third act that doesn't quite hold up to the first two acts and how well that's directed. Coming in at number 6 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I love everything about this film, almost everything. There's a couple plot holes that don't get explained, again, how does no one find Ego's flower behind a fucking Dairy Queen? Yeah, sure, that doesn't make sense, but when has anything in the MCU never made sense? That's just a stupid plot hole to be focusing all your attention on. But what I really love about this film is that this film doesn't play into all of the common, sequel things that you would find for superhero films. It takes a more independent direction than the Marvel Studios stuff does, because a lot of what they do in this film is that they explore the characters further. They talk about the dynamics between Gamora and her sister Nebula, and how their bond together was kind of broken because of Thanos' grip on them. We see the ego that struck up between all of the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and having the literal main villain of the film be Ego, and him having an egotistical mind, it plays off very well between the dynamic of the Guardians of the Galaxy and their relationship to Ego. I really love that. Taserface as a secondary villain, I thought was hilarious. Not an interesting villain, but I thought it was hilarious. And then the gold people are essentially pissed off because, their feelings were hurt. And I love that shit. I really do. I love that stuff. The action, well done. Music choices for every scene, pretty much to a T, fits really well. And the ending, oh man, that ending. I love that ending. The ending of it, I really do. And this film, despite also having themes of sisterhood and egotism and whatnot, it's primarily a story about fatherhood and being a role model. And that's what this movie really speaks to me about, is that it's a natural sort of progression of these characters. The comedy is most of the time really well handled. There's a couple jokes that don't hold up so well. And everything about it, I don't know. I just really love the film. I really do. I don't think it's a degradation from the original, because how can you sit there and say that Ronan the Accuser is a better villain than Ego the Living Planet, who has a lot of more thematical sort of weight towards the Guardians of the Galaxy, and has a much more devious plan and a much more deeper connection to Star-Lord as a character. And I really enjoy the film. Everything about the film is really good, save for a few jokes and some pacing issues here and there. But I think it's genuinely one of my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to date. And I don't think it's as disappointing as people seem to think it is. Coming in at number 5 is Blade Runner 2049. Despite the film not making as much as it needed to be, and a film that had some mixed reception, much like the original Blade Runner. Blade Runner 2049 is a sequel that's very different because it doesn't do everything that you would expect from a Blade Runner sequel. Because most studios would sit there with Blade Runner in their hands and say, let's make this into an action movie. And no, they don't. Denis Villeneuve is becoming one of my favorite directors, and his work on the film, as well as the writing for the film, is very different than the original Blade Runner, and it does tell some story beats there are some story beats that are similar to the original, but as a whole, everything's aged 30 years since the original film debuted. There is some stilted acting at times, but that's due to the fact that our lead character is a replicant. But I liked Joy as a character. I really did, because she represented so much of what was going on in the film. Like, she wanted to help out Kay with the investigation. She was there to help. That's what she needed to be, but she had her own character, her own voice. And when, her data chip gets smashed in the film, I was genuinely sad for Ryan Gosling's character in the film. But the most praiseworthy aspect I could say about this film, and I hope that he gets an Oscar for it, is the cinematography. Roger Deakins' cinematography in this film is beyond believable. It's gorgeous. Every shot in this film is a fucking painting that I could put in a palace. It's beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, going off a tangent, but that's Blade Runner 2049. It's pretty much well directed. It has some good acting. Some of the wardrobe could have been better for Harrison Ford, in my opinion. I mean, honestly, he, again, just like I said from the trailer thoughts video I did on 2049, it looks like he came off of a photo shoot for Hanes, and that's kind of what took me out of the film sometimes. But I really did enjoy Blade Runner 2049, despite a weak box office and despite a mixed reaction. So, yeah, and it's probably going to get the same sort of cult status as the original. I could be wrong, but it's getting there. At number 4 is Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. This is a very beautiful looking film. The cinematography, the visuals of this film is very well done. It's very Guillermo del Toro. The story itself is also very interesting, and having like all these different characters have different loves, right? The next door neighbor to our mute lead is attracted to many different things, and his character is pretty cool. The lead character, the actress who plays our mute lead, she does a terrific job doing the acting. Like, a lot of her acting is very visual, and she has a lot of facial expressions that she needs to convey, and a lot of emotions that she needs to communicate without having to talk once. And it's very well done. Doug Jones as the fish creature is also well done too, and the makeup design for him is also kind of cool. And in my opinion, this is Guillermo del Toro's most adult fairy tale film since Pan's Labyrinth. And I don't say that often, but Guillermo del Toro comes dangerously close to making this film my favorite Guillermo del Toro film. And it's really, again, well done. Music choices, great. Michael Shannon's character, brilliantly pathetic villain, but it's played very, very well in the pathetic realm. There's maybe one thing I didn't like about it, and that's one character that comes in, and he's this general, and he's like the most stereotypical general you could ever see in a film ever. But I really enjoyed this film. If you love romance movies or even horror films, you'll like this film a lot. I think this is one of the best Guillermo del Toro films since Pan's Labyrinth, since Hellboy 1, since Pacific Rim. Like, he's a good director. He knows what he wants to do visually, and it does really well to communicate the film's message. Coming in at number 3 is Coco, done by the Walt Disney Company. And for a film that's done by the Walt Disney Company, it doesn't really feel fully Disney. I mean, yes, there's elements that do make it Disney, like particularly the art style and the music choices, but everything about it doesn't really feel Disney. The story actually is kind of the most Disney thing in there, being that, oh, well, this is a character that, wants to do something that his family does not want him to do, so he violates it. But for the purposes of the story itself, of what it's trying to say, it works well, and I wasn't too bothered by it. The animation, as always, is very beautiful, and it's very culturally rich with the vibrant colors, the art styles, the different music that's put up. It's probably one of the biggest love letters to Dia de los Muertos ever, and I am a big fan of Dia de los Muertos. The ideas of it, the 3-day celebration of the dead that they do with the ofrendas and the petals and whatnot, and I really enjoy it. Being enveloped into the world of Coco is so mesmerizing. It's so beautiful to look at. The story itself, it can be a bit derivative from the Book of Life, but what sets that movie apart from the Book of Life is the fact of the matter of death. Death in Book of Life is very one note, right? There's no depth given to it. It's just kind of like, oh, well, what we know of death is death, and there's nothing, you could live forever in the afterlife. But what sets this apart is that Coco goes one step further in describing death, and that is a second death, the final death. So the second death that's presented in Coco is essentially when your family pretty much forgets everything about you. Like, you're no longer being memorialized. There's no more ofrendas for you, and in a certain time, your actual spiritual body is just gone. And that's kind of the more depressing aspect about Coco, but it feels so real. Because in my mindset, I do think of death as kind of like a two-part system, where you die physically, but your memories still live on, but at a certain point in time, you're probably going to be forgotten in a lot of ways, unless you become immortal, like the surprise villain of the movie, which I can't really give away. But Coco presents a more earnest view of life and death than what the Book of Life could, which was, in my opinion, more commercial than Disney. But that's just my opinion. Coco gives some brilliant performances, great music, great animation, pretty much great everything all around. I don't really find anything too bad about the film, so take it for what it's worth, and Coco's my number 3 film of the year. Coming in at number 2 is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. I want to start off by saying that the film is it's going to divide a lot of people. It's a very divisive film, mostly because of what it's trying to say. And for more clarification on that, I'll link below a video down in the description of just what I'm thinking about with this. But essentially, 3 Billboards presents this sort of message about hate begetting hate, hate begets hate, and a story about not giving up on the things you love, and sometimes a miscommunication of what you think is right is probably going to be the worst thing later down the road. And I really do enjoy this film. The writing of this film is near masterpiece levels of well done. Frances McDormand gives a really great performance as his mother, whose daughter was murdered 6 months prior. I can't remember what exactly happens in the movie. Sam Rockwell plays this cop in this film. It plays a cop in this film, and he gives a pretty good performance. And I dare to say that his character has one of the best character arcs that I've seen for a supporting actor. And the film doesn't necessarily say that you should, empathize with him at the end, but it does kind of say that maybe sometimes bad people could do some good things and have some redeeming qualities. It doesn't say to fully redeem them, but it does say to give at least some people a chance. Not all people, but some, right? it has a great message about hate and how miscommunication can be hateful. And it's a weird movie. I'll say that it has a really good message about hate that not a lot of people like to talk about. It's not a thing that a lot of people want to talk about nowadays. But getting back on track of the actual film, writing's good, direction's good. Pretty much, it's a near masterpiece in my opinion. What is my number one film of 2017? Well, I'll just put up this poster.
That is correct. My number one film of 2017 is Logan. Now, why is it at my number one? Well, to answer it in a short answer question, this is the best superhero film I've seen since The Dark Knight, where it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's willing to discuss and dissect the superhero genre in many different ways and aspects. It has characters that resonate. It has performances that are stand out. The writing here is stupendous with many different subtexts about copyrights, about the actual state of the comics industry as well as the superhero genre. It has great final performances from Hugh Jackman, and it has a great final performance by Patrick Stewart, who gives probably one of my favorite supporting actor roles of the year, being that he is a character throughout the last 17 years that's been trying to get Logan to understand the essence of what a family can be. And the ending, while some people may have a problem with the ending and how kind of cheesy it all is, it fits narratively, and given now that we have a new context in the wake of the Fox-Disney merger that may happen, and if it does go through, that means that context is kind of a prelude to what is happening. What I mean by it is that the ending of this particular film is a prelude to what may happen in the future between Fox and Disney. If the Fox-Disney merger fully goes through and the U.S. government doesn't, interfere with it at all, and if it does, it'll mean that the ending not only means that it is, it's time for a new generation to take it over. It's also having to do with a bookmarking of one era of the Fox property versus a new era of the Fox property, and it works very well in tandem with the film's ending. And again, that ending with Laura flipping the cross into an X is a very fitting image that anyone could see in a graphic novel, and it's probably one of my favorite images in all of cinema this year. Just that image alone of Laura flipping the cross into an X is very well-meaning and has a lot of weight added to it, considering that of all the contexts of today's modern cinematic landscape, this fits narratively and coherently inside of the political consciousness of this film. But that's just a short answer. A long answer is being produced as we speak, and I'm going to be trying my best to fully analyze the entirety of Logan. And that'll come out on or near the anniversary of this film's release. And I'm excited to talk about it in full in a later video. So, thank you guys so much for watching my best list of 2017. And here's to looking to a bright and great 2018. Because 2017 was a good year for film. I'm excited for 2018. So, keep those cameras rolling, and peace.